If you want to improve your golf, you need to improve your lower body action, because the lower body action is one of the things that sets the best in the world apart from the recreational golfer. And we're going to touch on that in this video and explain some possibly new concepts to help you do this. So at home in my garden, because we're still in lockdown here in the UK, although some good news last night, the golf courses may well be opening in the UK over the next coming days and weeks, so you may have some access to the golf course. So leg action, hip action, so important. If you can improve this, you can improve your golf and you can start to strike the ball much better than you have before. So the lesson plan today is really to talk about something which is often overlooked, which is pivot point, and where that is in the hips and how that changes things. And then we're going to go through concepts of what you should actually be trying to do and how this might differ from what you are currently doing. And then we're going to give you a drill to enable you to work on this and also monitor what you're currently doing, which is really important if you're trying to move forward. So what do we mean by pivot point? Well, we're going to talk about that first, but just in order for us to get a visual, we're going to take this alignment stick and just pop it through my belt loops. So for the purpose of this video, we need to discuss what we mean by pivot point. So pivot point is the point at which we're rotating around. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a setup, and you can see I've created a visual on the screen there. So if the center point, so roughly where my belt buckle was the pivot point, we would have this movement here. Okay, and you can see how that's pivoting around that center point. Now, what about if we had the left hip or the lead hip as the pivot point? Well, suddenly that would look a little different because we're rotating around a different fixed point. And if my trail hip was the pivot point, again, we have a different movement around that fixed point. So what happens with lots of golfers is during the golf swing, that pivot point changes, which it actually does sometimes for the best players, but it changes incorrectly. So let's explain what we mean by that. So in a backswing, what we see is the center point very often as being the pivot point. And we make this nice rotation back. But now, as we transition, the pivot point suddenly changes and moves out towards that lead hip. So my left hip is now the pivot point, or getting close to that left hip. So what happens now is as that holds its position and the hips start to unwind, we get them rotating. So they're now back to being roughly parallel to the target line. But you can see how as that pivot point changed, my hips have now shifted forward in towards the golf ball by a significant amount. If we look at what that would look like in a golf swing, those are the golfers who make this quite nice backswing, but as they start down, they get this standing up of the body. They lose all of their angles. They often get the club shaft a little bit steep from here, and then once they get to this point, unfortunately, it's very difficult to do the good things down at impact. The body tends to stall out. We tend to have a lot of flip in the hands. We don't tend to be able to control the loft, the face angle, the attack angle, the strike, all those things which we know will help us play some good golf. So the issue there was the pivot point changed from roughly in the middle towards that lead hip. So what do we see from the best in the world? Well, we'll take Rory McIlroy as an example. Not that he's the only person that does this, but he's recognised as someone with a fantastic golf swing and, more importantly, some great leg action. Well, we often see this slight lowering of the body in the transition. We often see the head drop a little bit. We call it a squat or a kind of settling movement. And the reason they're able to do that is because their pivot point changes, but it changes from the center more towards the trail hip. Let me show you what that would look like. So we take a setup, pivot point is in the middle, but what we often see now from someone like a Rory is it's the trail hip now which is pivoting. That tends to hold, and as that holds and the left starts to move back, what we end up with is, again, those hips have moved very much more towards parallel to my target line, as they did in that first example. But notice how I've actually increased the angles in my body because of what I did in that pivot and how I changed it from the center more to that trail hip. What that's done is that's given me this squatting motion. It's given me all of this room that I can now get the arms into, I can get the club into. And because I've made that slightly kind of more squatting movement, I'm now able to rotate much better. I'm able to use the ground later in the golf swing, which is really important. And those things allow me to control the face, control the loft, control the attack angle, strike the ball better, generate more energy through the golf swing. So how that pivot point changes is massive. It's huge, and it can really make a difference between the golfer that sort of stands up early into the golf ball, which never sort of ends well, and those golfers that tend to make that fantastic leg action that we see playing at the weekends, making millions of pounds. So if you're struggling with leg action, the first thing we're going to get you to do is just have the concept. What are you trying to do from the top? So many golfers from the top of their golf swing are going to be firing the trail side. And when you tend to fire the trail side, the lead side doesn't move enough. And that's really important. So what I like to do when I'm coaching, one of the references I do is from the top, I like to reference the tops of the thighs. And I like to see what does that golfer do from the top of their golf swing. What we'd love that golfer to do is hold the trail thigh and start to move the left thigh back away from that point. I love to see that in the golf swing. It does lots of things that we've just discussed. It gets that kind of lowering, that getting the centre of mass a little bit lower, gets that squatting motion, gets the rotation going early. So many good things can come from that. So I've got an alignment stick here through my belt loops, great way to practice. And what you're going to do is you're just going to have some rehearsals trying to establish what does that feel like. So you're going to take a setup, you're going to make a backswing, and then you're going to very much feel as if this side of the alignment stick doesn't move as much. It will move a little bit. But from here, I'm going to feel very much like I take the lead side of the alignment stick and I move it back to join that point. And you can see how that's a very, very different movement and a very, very different look to the golfer who holds this in position and tends to fire the right side forward. That's definitely what we're trying to avoid. The alignment stick is not going to make that movement for you. It's just going to give you some more awareness. And in practice, awareness is absolutely key. You need to be aware of what you're currently doing. So what would that look like in a golf swing? Well, it would look a little bit like this. We're going to go up to the top as normal. Right holds, left moves away. There's my lowering movement, and then from there, we can just go through and hit it. That would be a great way for you to start this process. Very, very slow, stopping halfway down, starting to get that kind of movement understood, trying to get conceptually it correct, and then we can start to add a little bit of flow, a little bit of speed, a little bit of rhythm, a little bit of tempo to that golf swing. But initially, the drills are there to help you understand the movement, the concept, and get it very, very clear. So if we can understand what should happen, understand how the pivot point changing makes a huge difference, have a practice station which creates some awareness, we're starting to build a very good situation where we can move towards what we're likely to do. And just one little point as we come to the end of this video, as I'm making that movement, what we should see from the face-on view is that we are also starting to move a little bit towards the target. We're starting to move our pressure into our lead side with our lower body. So if we can start to get the sensation that the trail hip is holding, the lead hip is pulling back, but it's also moving towards the target. That's really important because we do want the hip action to be correct from that camera angle there, but we also need that pressure to be moving into that lead side fairly early. Not going to be as successful if we simply just work the hip back and we don't shift that pressure. But this video is a little bit more about trying to create some better action from the down the line view and getting some better angles in the body. Ultimately, you can start to build that into full speed. And better hip action gives so many good positive things in the downswing. So I really hope that video helps. Potentially, that's a different way of thinking about it. It might well be a bit of a aha moment. I'm hoping it is. And I'm hoping that your next practice session gives you some positive results. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll hopefully see you back here again soon.